Hi, I'm Stacey. In this little series, we're going to talk about how to ramp up on this online whiteboard, get yourself ready to get in there and take the test. And we're also going to cover how to set up the overall whiteboard for the quant, verbal, and IR sections of the exam to help you not just answer the individual problems, but actually manage your time across the entire section so you make sure you finish on time. Oh, a little housekeeping before we start. I shot another whiteboard video that talks about just the basic tools and what they all are and how to use them, like a little whiteboard 101. I would go take a look at that before, you can keep watching me right now, but go take a look at it. But when I get to the quant section, like before you watch the rest of that stuff. Okay. All right. So how to study with this thing. There are really two broad scenarios that we have to talk about. There are the people who are pretty much ready to go or who have even been waiting to take this test. You're going to need to ramp up pretty quickly because you're ready and want to get in there in the next couple of weeks to take the exam. There's also the group of you who are further or like earlier in your studies, so the test is further away. For you, you also may or may not actually end up taking it online. You may be back in a testing center by the time you're ready to take it. So we'll talk about those considerations. For those of you who are pretty much ready to go, I'm telling my own students that they should give themselves probably a good solid couple of weeks to get ready, to get used to this whiteboard tool before they take the exam. It's doable. I think I only practiced about 5 or 6 hours in the end before I got in there to take the exam myself. It was pretty good. It was not quite enough time. And of course, it's going to take me less time because I've done this a lot than it's going to take you. So you're going to want to give yourself a solid, probably 15, 20 plus hours of practice with this thing over a couple of weeks before you get in there and take it. I'm going to recommend a series of steps to sort of ramp up. The first step was suggested by my colleague Chris Gentry, and it's like the perfect suggestion. I'm so glad he said this, which is first do OG problems that you've done before. So redo some problems. That's really good for practice anyway. We always tell our students to do that anyway, but you might as well have that be your first foray into the whiteboard because you've already seen the problems. It's not so crazy, and you can think about how you solved it before, and do you want to set it up the same way? Do you want to set it up differently? What adjustments do you need to make because it's this online thing, and what things can you do just the way that you do them on scratch paper? So that's a really good way to test that out. Once you start to see what those adjustments are and start to feel more comfortable with what the tools are and how to use them, you can graduate to doing new official guide problems. Ditto analyzed from the point of view of how did that go? What do I like and what do I want to do differently, or how do I want to set this up differently in future? As you start to feel more comfortable with single problems, graduate to doing problem sets, so 4, 5, 8, 10 problems in a timed block, and you're moving around on the scratch paper to do them all. And then finally, you're going to graduate to doing an entire practice test in this format. When you do that, make sure that you're doing the quant, verbal, IR order. Don't take a break between quant and verbal, and then take a 5-minute break between verbal and IR. Anything I want to say there? If you give yourself about 2 weeks, and you're going to be doing this pretty much every day. I do think it's important to give yourself a day off every week because if you study too much, your brain explodes. But give yourself a lot of practice with this thing before you get in there. If you're in that other scenario where you do have more time and you're not even entirely sure that you'll be taking it in this format, we're going to make the ramp up more gradual. It will be less painful than it will for those folks who have to do it really quickly. And it also gives you time to see how things are playing out in the world over the next many weeks. And as you get closer, you can see either, oh, yep, I'm going to have to take it online and I need to start ramping up even more, or actually it looks like I'm going to be back in the testing center and so I don't have to do that anymore. So you're going to do the same flow, the same series of steps that I described for those who have to ramp up quickly. You're just going to do it more gradually. So this week you might do like 15 minutes on 2 or 3 different days, practicing with the whiteboard, redoing some old OG problems. And you're just going to slowly ramp up the proportion of time or the amount of time that you're spending every week doing that as time goes on. And of course, if it becomes more apparent as you go later that, yep, I'm going to have to do this in the online format, you're just going to start to do a higher proportion of your studies using this. The one caveat I want to make for everybody, actually both groups, is that whenever you're looking to learn something new, like you're diving into, you know, a new chapter in one of our books or something, you want to actually not do that work on the whiteboard. You want to make sure that your brain can actually learn this without having the added complication of having to think about what to do on the whiteboard. So do that stuff just on regular paper the way you normally would. Save the whiteboard practice for test-like problems, for doing stuff that you're going to do in the same format as the test. And then the other thing I would just say again for everybody is, by the time you get to about 2 or 3 weeks out from whenever you want to take the real test, at that point, anytime you're doing official guide problems or official format problems, I would be using the whiteboard at that point. You really just, that's what you're going to have to do on the real thing. So you want to make sure that you're practicing under test-like conditions when you're that close to the exam. Okay, now let's talk about the quant section. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about how to set up the scratch paper to help you keep track of your time as you go, so that you don't find yourself in the scenario of having like 10 questions left with 5 minutes left. Not a good scenario. There are a couple of different ways that you can do this. They have some pros and cons, so we'll talk about that. And I'm going to draw them out live as we do this, and we'll see how good of a job I do. For the quant section of the exam, we're going to answer 31 questions in 62 minutes. There are 2 big methods that I want to talk about for this one. One of them is a little bit more cumbersome, like to set up. It's going to take you a little bit more time, but it has an advantage that the other one doesn't have. The other one's faster, but you then lose this advantage. So I'll show you both. You can decide which one you want to do. If you have been using our yellow pad technique for the regular scratch paper, the first one, the longer one that I'm going to show you, but with the extra advantage, that's the one that basically matches our yellow pad technique. This is what I used on the exam myself, by the way, specifically for this advantage. So here's the whiteboard. Go do the Whiteboard 101 thing before you dive into this if you haven't seen it yet, because I'm not going to explain these tools. First thing I'm going to do is zoom all the way out. So basically until I can't click this anymore. And then I'm going to grab the line tool, this one right here. And the first thing I'm going to do is just split the screen in half, both horizontally and vertically. And then I'm going to split it in half again horizontally up here and down here. And then I'm going to split it in half again horizontally over here, or vertically, excuse me, over here. And I'm even going to do it one more time. I'm going to split this in half vertically and this in half vertically. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side, split it in half vertically once, and then split each of these 2 sub-segments vertically. And my final little thing is to grab you can do this with the text tool or the pen tool. I just like the pen tool. And I'm going to start writing out how much time I should still have left on the clock by the time I get to the end of each column of 4 questions. Oops, and I shouldn't talk and try to write at the same time. That should not be a 12, that should be a 16. I'm counting up here by multiples of 8. So 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48, and 56. And then my last thing to do here is to put a big X in this one. We actually only need to answer 31 questions, but I just made an 8x4 grid, so there's 32 little cells here, so I'm not going to use this one right here. And then I start to zoom in and pan until I get myself up into this upper corner here, and I'm zoomed in enough that I've got like a decent amount of scratch paper here to do my work for the problem. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to do my first problem. Yay, the answer is X, whatever it is. And then I'm going to start scrolling down to do each subsequent problem, whatever it is that I'm going to do. When I get to the very bottom, this one, the X means I'm not going to do a problem here, so I do 3 questions to start for my first column. And this one tells me how much time I should still have on the clock, approximately. I actually only had about 54 minutes on the clock when I got to the end of my first column, because I had spent a little bit of time up front to set up this grid. But the advantage that I really need on the quant section is I don't want to have to try to remember when I need to check the clock, like at which time or which question. I need it to tell me, because otherwise I'll just screw it up. So basically, by the time I get to the end of each column, I run right into this reminder that I've already set up for myself about how much time approximately I should have on the clock. If you're within a couple of minutes of whatever that time is, you're fine. Just keep going at the pace you're going. It's only if you find that you're either really far behind or really far ahead that you need to start taking action. And so then I'm going to scroll back up to the top of my next set of 4 little cells here, do this problem, and so on. And I know when I get to my next grouping that I should have about 48 minutes left, and basically all the way until the end of the section. So that's the longer. It's going to take you a little bit longer to set this up, but with this advantage that it will actually just set up for you exactly when you should be checking to see whether you're on time. Now, the second method is faster to set up, but it's not going to have that last little benefit, which is that it tells you exactly when to check what's going on, or reminds you when to check. So this one's based on the idea of checking at certain blocks of questions, the question numbers that end in 6s and 1s. So 6, 11, 16, 21, 26. You don't have to bother with 31 because then you should be done by then. And the time that this corresponds with is really nice. It corresponds to 50 minutes, 40 minutes, 30 minutes, 20 minutes, and 10 minutes. This one is great. You can set it up really quickly at the side of your scratch paper, or if you even just memorize it, you don't have to write anything down at all. The only problem is that it won't tell you, hey, it's time to go check the clock. So you'll have to remember to go check. I personally, the quant section messes me up enough that I would forget, and I'd be like, I'm at question 8. What does that mean? What should my time say? I'm not sure what to do. So I do actually invest the time up front to set up that whole grid so that I don't have to think about it later. But if you're confident that you don't need to worry about that, or maybe time is not as much of an issue for you on the quant section, then something like this, quick and dirty, might actually be better for you. In the verbal section, again, 2 different ways to do this. The setup is basically, the strategy is the same actually for the 2 things I'm going to show you. It's just whether you orient it horizontally or vertically, whatever works for your brain. Overall for verbal, it's a little bit more annoying to track verbal because we spend different lengths of time on average for different question types. And in particular for reading comp, we've got all that reading time that we have to do up front that doesn't exist for the other question types. So for reading comp, the way that we organize it is really by 4 big quadrants of the test. So 9 questions, 4 quadrants of 9 questions. There's 36 questions on the verbal section of the exam. The reason we chose 4 groupings or quadrants of 9 questions is that there are usually 4 reading comp passages on the test, and they're usually spread out fairly evenly through the section. So it's often, not always, the case that if you do the questions in 4 groups of 9, that you'll have 1 reading comp passage in each group. And so that makes it nice to just balance the time that we're measuring here. So I'll show you the horizontal and the vertical way of taking a look at this. My colleague Dave Mahler I do it vertically, and my colleague Dave Mahler was like, no, you have to show them horizontal too, because I agree, there are ways that it's easier. I just like the vertical. So what I do is I come in, for the vertical, for my way, I do A, B, C, D, E, grab the line tool, and just give myself a little grid here. I'm actually making this bigger than I need to. Sorry, hold on. That undo tool is a lifesaver, by the way. Get used to using that a lot in the test. Okay, so I'm going to do something like this. And so what I'm setting up here is this part of it is where I'm going to keep track of my answer eliminations as I go, my little X's and my check marks as I decide what I want to keep and don't want to keep. The space around is the space where I'm going to take notes. So I'm going to do notes like in a little cloud basically around my thing here. I might also just zoom out a tiny bit to give myself a little bit more writing space around. I did notes for CR and SC, critical reasoning and sentence correction, above and below. Oh, sorry, and I forgot one more thing. Sorry. Right underneath the E for the first one, you're going to write 48. So for your first grouping, we're going to do 9 questions around this little thing. And for that first 9 questions, this first grouping, you're looking for the time to be approximately 48 minutes by the time you're done with this group. Then we're going to recreate this a second time and rate 32, and then recreate it a third time and rate 16, and then a fourth time. And you can either write 0 or just know that you need to be done with that 4th grouping by the time the clock runs out. So I would pan up a little bit and like do notes up here until this filled up, and then pan down a little bit to do more notes down here for CR and SC. For reading comp, I did the first passage over here, and then if I got a second passage within that same grouping, I did it on this side, and that was like a little mental or visual reminder to myself that I got a second RC passage in this group. And that means when I go to finish this, I'm probably going to actually be a few minutes behind, or like maybe only have 47 or 6 or 5 minutes left, because I got 2 RC passages in this grouping. And then I'm going to go to the questions, and I'm just going to start keeping track as I go down. And I do 5 questions. I was personally doing 5 questions this way and then 4 questions this way. You can do all 9 in one direction, or however you'd like to do that. And then when I'm done with that, I would just scroll down, make that little grid again, write 32, and keep going. Now, Dave prefers and other colleagues of mine prefer doing this horizontally. I like the vertical because that's how it is on the screen, and my brain just works that way. But I agree with Dave. Oops, C, not D. I agree with Dave that there are advantages to this vertical way that he wants to do it. So same deal, I'm going to write my letters. I'm going to make myself this little grid here. And what Dave was saying basically is that you just do, like, as you're doing the answer eliminations here, you're also doing your notes right here for whatever that problem is. I would do that for, again, like SC and CR, and then maybe I would pop over here to do RC, because I was taking some real estate to do my RC notes as I was taking the test. And again, you would do this, you would do 9 questions within one grouping of this little grid here, and you're looking for that to be 48 minutes, and then just repeat for 32 minutes, 16 minutes, and 0 minutes for the 4 groupings. So that's the verbal section. Let's talk IR. For the integrated reasoning section, we have to answer 12 questions in 30 minutes. The yellow pad technique that we use for the regular scratch paper is literally just take 3 pages, make a cross on each page, and that lets you do 4 questions per page, and then you're done with the section. So we're basically going to recreate that right here. So grab my line tool. I'm going to do 3 crosses on screen. And text or drawing tool, whatever you prefer, to just write these times down here, 0, 10, 20. And then just like the quant section, I'm basically going to zoom in until I get to a nice sized, and I'm going to have to zoom in a little bit more here. Let's say a little bit more, until I get to like a nice size space to be able to, I'm going to zoom in one more time, to be able to go do work on a problem. So I can do the work 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever I do, I'm going to get to question number 4 over here, and that's going to tell me I should see around 20 minutes left on the screen. Again, within a couple of minutes, you're fine. And then I'll come back up here to do my next 4 questions and my final 4. You'll find for the IR section that there are going to be some questions where you need extensive notes, and then there are going to be some questions where you need none. On the graph questions that I did, I literally didn't need to write a single thing down. It was literally read the graph and answer the question. That was it. So but like on an MSR question, typically you have to take more notes. So it's fine to like start here and be like, oh, I need some more space. Just go ahead and use this space over here, because chances are someplace in that quadrant, you're going to have a problem where you have very few notes that you need to worry about. Okay, so let's talk about where to place the whiteboard on the screen. So first of all, your screen, the test screen, is going to be maximized on your computer. And then the whiteboard is always going to be sitting on top or in the foreground of the test screen. That's not going to be the case right now when I take a practice test. When I take a practice test, since I've just got 2 different browser windows, whichever one I'm clicking on is going to be the one that's in the front. So when I'm practicing, I actually gave myself a little bit of extra space down here so that when I click on this, I can really easily click back to my whiteboard. I placed the whiteboard when I was taking the test in the bottom center of the screen so that I minimized the number of times that I had to move the whiteboard around while I was taking the exam. That allowed me to see all of the test question content up here and answer choices, but also to get to the next button down here in the corner. And then of course I can see my timer and the question number that I'm on up here. The only time that I had to, that it was a little annoying, was when I do pick an answer. Let's pick an answer. I have no idea what this is. And I click next. Now, again, the whiteboard stays in front the whole time. So this answer confirmation box that popped up is behind or partially behind my whiteboard. On the real test, this thing is its own window, so I can just grab it and drag it up and then click the yes button. Unfortunately, it doesn't stay where I dragged it, so the next time I have to click the yes button, it's back down behind my whiteboard, so I did have to keep pulling it back up. I will suggest to GMAT to see whether they can actually move that so that it's higher up, or so that when we drag it on screen, it stays where we put it the next time it pops up, but I don't know whether that's something they can change. And so then I go and start on my next question. The only problems for which I had to move the whiteboard, I never had to move it for a quant or verbal question. Sorry, a quant or sentence correction or CR question. I did have to move it when I had reading comp, of course, because the passage was right over here. So I just slid it off to the side here. Ditto for a couple of the IR question types, but for the most part, my whiteboard was just bottom center the entire time. So that's how to use the whiteboard, how to study with the whiteboard to get ready, and even how to set this thing up in a practice test. I'm not going to lie, there's going to be a steep learning curve here to get ready for this thing. It's going to be some effort. And unfortunately, we don't have a ton of time because this was introduced so quickly due to the pandemic. The interesting thing is that we're all literally learning how to do this together worldwide right now. We're in the same boat. So let's crowdsource this, experiment, play with this, toss me your ideas down in the comments, talk to people online or to your friends who are studying for this exam. If you're taking a class, brainstorm with your instructor and your classmates. And let's really figure out the best ways to use this thing and to share those ideas so that we can all get up to speed as quickly and easily as we possibly can. So good luck, happy studying, and seriously, share your ideas. I really want to hear what you have to say.